Today, we're going to talk about making better portraits by having fun, both in front of the camera and behind the camera on Behind the Shot. Hi again. Welcome to Behind the Shot. This is the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots from conception to completion and all the stories and challenges that happen in between. I'm Steve Brazill. As always, this show will have a blog post associated with it. You can see all the show notes up at behindtheshot.tv. Also, if you want to subscribe to the podcast, it's available in whatever podcast app you choose. If the podcast app supports video, there is a video feed for you. If it doesn't, there's also an audio feed. And the video is also up on the YouTube channel at Behind the Shot. Make sure on YouTube, if you do subscribe to that channel, hit the bell too. That way you get each and every notification when I post something new. So today's guest is somebody I talked to a while ago. We got to know each other a little bit, and I love his podcast. We'll get into that in a minute, actually. But I want to welcome to the show, Behind the Shot, Ibarionex Perello. How are you, sir? Good to meet you.
I'm good, man. Good to see you and talk with you again.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again, too. And I was commenting in the green room, I love your lighting. Your lighting is so nice. So we're going to get into the fact that you do a podcast, because your podcast is not only well known, but it's on some really good lists of great podcasts. I'll touch on that too in a minute. But let's kind of hit some baseline stuff here. You are LA based, and your type of street photography, the way I think of it, is not just street photography, but like street photography and people. How do you describe the type of photography that you do?
Oh, man, I always struggle with that because people always want to put you in a certain genre. And I tell people I shoot streets, I shoot travel, I shoot portraiture. And depending who I'm talking to, I'll kind of skew it for one or the other. I just have an affinity for all three of them. In fact, I just have an affinity for photographing anything. But if I have the time and I have my choice, I love just hitting the streets, doing traditional street photography, as well as doing street portraits of complete strangers. And it's always been a part of my approach to photography. So,
as a photographer and doing all the different things that you do, I was in researching you for this show. I was fascinated to see that you're an author as well. I knew you were an educator. I did not know that you had authored 6 books. So let me mention some of the books in case people want to go get them. Chasing the Light, Improving Your Photography Using Available Light, and then also Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. That's an interesting one to me. And along with that side, you're a podcaster. So let's talk about your podcast a little bit, The Candid Frame. How often do you release The Candid Frame?
Excuse me. It's usually every week, God willing. And I usually put out probably 50 episodes a year, but sometimes I miss a week for whatever reason. I've been doing it since 2006. So by the beginning of 2020, I'll be at my 500th episode.
You've been doing the Candid Frame podcast for 13 years. 2006, most people didn't even know what a podcast was yet.
Yeah, there were very few out there. I think they came to my attention in 2005, which was just soon after, it started getting into, the techies awareness. And because I was one of them, I started hearing about this thing called podcasting. And I was listening to photo podcasts like Tips from the Top Floor with Chris Marquardt.
Chris Marquardt, who's also still going.
Yeah, he's the godfather, I would think, for photo podcasts. And then Martin Bailey. And there were several others
also still
out
going
there. Yeah. And there were several others like Jeff Curto and and a lot of other ones that are no longer around. And I thought that it would be nice if we had a show where people actually talk to photographers about photography and process, because that really wasn't around. So I just figured out, well, since I write all the time and I interview people and I have access to photographers as a result of my work as a magazine editor, why don't I just do it? So I just kind of figured the mechanics of it and just began calling people, emailing them and saying, hey, I'm doing this show. I'd love to talk to you about your work. And I've been doing it ever since.
You literally just described the way I ended up podcasting and the reason that I do this show. I've said it a million times. I love a good interview, right?
Yeah.
It's neat to see, more information about a specific person. But the reason I do the show the way that I do is because I want to know process, right? I want to learn about people based on how they work. I want to reverse the personal interview and interview the photograph to find out how that photographer actually ticks. I want to mention your podcast because this is cool to me. Flern, Aaron Nace of Flern, was just on my show right before yours, gave us a discount code I'll give out in a minute. But they also have a magazine at the Flern site, and they just released a blog post of the best podcasts for photographers. The Candid Frame is on it, sir. Congratulations to you.
Yeah, thank you. I was very excited to hear that.
Yeah, and it was a really good list of podcasts. I'm not on it, which actually isn't surprising to me. I've only been doing it a couple of years, but there were some really good podcasts on there. And the Candid Frame being on there, if anybody's looking for it, the Aaron Nace episode, I've got a link to that magazine article. So before we get into the picture, I want to ask you a couple of just general photography questions. One of them is, how do you do what you do? Because every time I have a guest on, I look through their portfolio. And usually what I'm looking for is commonalities in shots, right? Sometimes even the artist will see two shots as completely different. But if you look at a body of work as a whole, you can kind of tend to see common threads, commonalities, right? You have a knack for seeing and capturing angles and light and geometry like very, very few people do. Do you realize that you see that way?
I think I've been more aware of it and sensitive to it as a result of the teaching that I've been doing. As a result of having to, teach people basically my personal approach to photography to help them develop their own. I've had to be very self-aware to a great degree. And then writing the books also helped that. So I think as a result of, I think the last 5 years, I've been a lot more conscious of my process than I ever was before then. So as I progress, I'm sometimes I can see where I'm going, but other times it's just a general sense of, oh, this is new to me, and I kind of like that. Sometimes it's not completely clear to me, but I see in the work that there's something different happening, and that I'm making a different choice, and it's just a process of discovery for me.
Let me follow up on that. Are you saying that you're aware of that sensation during shooting, or when you're looking at them on the computer?
Oh, later on, I'm looking at them on the computer. I mean, but part of it is that I see something and I react to it, and I'm sometimes conscious of making a slightly different choice, because there's certain things I have photographed, or not. There are certain ways I have photographed countless times, and I know I could pull it out like a rabbit out of a hat. And so I've been sort of challenging myself to make different choices, that when I react to something, not immediately going to my go-to to capture the image and thinking about it. And I basically asking myself the question, what else can I do?
Right. Okay.
And so it's like, what different choice can I make here to take it somewhere where I might not otherwise? And sometimes it may completely fail. Sometimes it succeeds, but each photograph just inspires me to just rethink and to really sort of challenge the way that I see it.
With street photography, do you prefer the more open, yes, I don't mind if you see me shooting, or do you prefer the more covert type of street photography?
Doesn't matter to me. Yeah, I mean, I'm out there shooting. Sometimes people see what I'm doing. Other times, people are completely oblivious to me. Whatever I need to do to get the shot is what matters to me. If people see me, after I've made the shot, I may smile, I may interact with them, but for the most part, I find that most people just don't care, and I'm often just like, I'm like a shark, constantly moving. I never really there's sometimes where I'm just stand still, and I'm like, say, at a street corner, and then I've found the setting, and people see me from a distance, so they assume that I'm taking a picture of something else. But I may have scouted them when they were like 50 yards
Right.
away and knew that I was going to make them an element of the shot. So to some degree, they are aware that I'm there making photographs. They just don't know what's happening in my head or within my frame. And
Okay.
then there are other times where I'm just moving and I see something and I just react really quickly. I don't stop. I don't make eye contact. I just keep moving.
So, all right. So I want to get into today's shot. Before we do, though, a quick reminder for people that on the last episode, I had Aaron Nace of Flern, and I loved it. It was such a great episode. And if you're not familiar with Flern, you should go look it up. Flern, PH, Learn, all one word, flern.com. And Aaron was kind enough to give us a 20% discount code on a Flern subscription. So if you're interested in that, all you got to do is use the code behind the shot 20. It's all one word, behind the shot 20. That will get you 20% off a subscription at Flern. And I just think that's a really good deal. Also, one other thing, Flickr. We've got a Flickr group now. Make sure you head on over to there. It's Behind the Shot is the name of the group. Go join that. We're going to use that for some show-related stuff down the road. Me and Don Komarechka are going to do some stuff together, and it should be fun. So again, if you're a Flickr member, head on up there. And if you haven't used Flickr for a while, since Smug Mug bought it, really like it. They've done a really, really good job. So let's talk about this shot, all right? Because as I was looking through your photos, trying to pick the image that we were going to talk about today, and we went back and forth on a couple of them, but this one still sticks in my mind because this is a guy that is my youth, including the Dick Van Dyke Show. So this is an image of the legend himself, Dick Van Dyke. And I wanted, for those of you listening on an audio feed, as always, I highly recommend you go to the website behindtheshot.tv and go take a look at the shot. It's on the blog post with this episode. You can also go look at the video version of the show, either on YouTube or in your podcast feed, and you can see the picture in the video version. But let me try and describe it for the audio people. It's a portrait orientation shot. This is actually, I think, the first portrait orientation photo that I've ever used on the show. I usually go landscape orientation because it fits a video format better. Dick Van Dyke is sitting in what looks like an office with a wall of windows at an old desk with a pen and part of a little notebook or book on there as well. There's a jacket rack of hangers behind him, but there's 4 empty hangers and 2 jackets. There's a picture that says, baby. And here's the thing that I love about this. This is what makes this shot fun to me. Dick Van Dyke with the classic Dick Van Dyke smile. I mean, his smile is just infectious. So let's start on discussing this shot at the beginning. This was shot with a Fuji, right?
Yeah, it was a Fuji X100S.
Okay. Now, I looked up the EXIF data and it says aperture priority. Is that something you normally do, shoot in aperture priority?
Yeah, it's usually aperture priority or manual mode.
And so when you're doing this, the EXIF data said this was f5.6, assuming that's correct. What would have made you choose aperture priority at 5.6 as opposed to at 8 or 4 or whatever?
Well, usually when I'm in aperture priority, I usually have my camera set at a default of 5.6. And that's just so I always know what my starting point is. And then usually when I look through the viewfinder or the LCD, I see what's happening with my shutter speed. And that usually kind of determines whether I need to increase or decrease my ISO. Because if my shutter speed, say, is too slow, like it's a 30th of a second, at which point I would need to increase my ISO in order to get a more reasonable shutter speed.
Okay, well, this says that it was 1/125th of a second. Is there a minimum that you'd go? I mean, obviously 1/125th is okay. What if it dropped to 80 or 60? Where's your baseline for bump the ISO because I want to have a minimum shutter of?
It really depends on the subject. Usually on the street, it's usually at least 200, 250th of a second.
Because you're not stopping people, you're trying to catch them while in movement.
Right. So I'm trying to counter my own camera shake and the movement of the subject. When I was shooting in the studio for that year, most of the people were often static. If anything that was happening was with movements of their hands. So I didn't mind if I got a little blur from them moving their hands as they were gesturing while they were talking. Since they were either standing or sitting down, a 1/25th of a second was more than enough to give me a sharp result, especially since I was using the equivalent of a 35 millimeter lens. And 5.6 was just a generous sort of depth of field because in that particular shot, I wanted to get the environment of the studio to be as much a part of the picture as my rendering of Dick.
See, and it's that environmental portrait part of this shot to me that really works. You could crop tight on Dick here and it would still be a fantastic shot. But getting the open doorway, the jackets, the wall of windows, the baby sign, a little bit of a couch so that you know there's a couch in the room, that kind of sets your mind on what kind of room it is, the desk, the surface on the desk with a scratch on it, all adds to me as a viewer. I feel like I'm in the room. I see enough of the pieces to assemble a room in my head. Now, you said it's a 35 millimeter equivalent. This was 23 millimeters. Where is this? It looks like an LA office building.
Yeah, it is shot at the studios of Maximum Fun, who produce the NPR show Bullseye with Jesse Thorne, which is aired nationally in different public radio stations all over the country. And I was a production assistant at the show for a year, and so I was editing and helping to produce that show, as well as some of the other podcasts that they produced there. So I had been doing the podcast for 10 years by that time, and I saw this ad for a fellow. Basically, it was a production fellow, is the actual title for it. And I thought it would be really interesting to have a chance to work with, a show that basically is being produced to the quality standards of NPR. And so I applied, I got in, and it was great. So, and then during my time there, I started documenting what was happening in the studio because I was behind a computer editing audio all day. And I was just going crazy that I wasn't having much of a chance to shoot. So I just started bringing my camera to work and started documenting all the activities that happen at the studio, including the various guests, actors, singers, rappers, artists that would come to the studio to get interviewed. As soon as the interview was over, I'd pick up my camera and start making images of them interacting with Jesse and whoever else was there.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. For a session like this, were you there with Dick Van Dyke knowing that you were going to shoot? Were you a fly on the wall? In other words, was it an actual photo session, or you were just not?
All the images that I made during that time were me basically being a fly on the wall. The offices there are relatively small. There's a large area where most of the production team is. And then there is a dividing wall that leads to Jesse's office and the recording booth. So anytime that the episodes are being recorded, the guests go into the recording booth. And as soon as I would hear that they were done, I'd hear the door to the recording booth open up. And I would just get up, grab my camera, stop doing what I was doing, and then I would just find my way to wherever the action was, and I would just start making photographs. And Jesse and Dick were talking about politics because this was during the 2016 election, I think, was going on. And Dick Van Dyke was really big into Bernie. And I think he had just gone to a rally or something. And so they sat down and they were just talking politics. And I just positioned myself to the left and almost slightly behind Jesse while he was talking with Dick Van Dyke. So I just got up there and I just started making photographs while they were engaged with each other. And as you noted, all the other elements within the frame were things I was very conscious of as I composed the shot.
Okay, that was going to be one of my questions. So you were, is this cropped straight out of camera, or would you have cropped it in post?
I think I cropped it slightly because I think that my composition was slightly off kilter.
Okay, so you leveled it effectively.
So I leveled it, so I lost a little bit of it. So there's a little minor crop, but for the most part, I always try to shoot a crop in frame, in camera.
Okay. So that explains it. So one of my questions was, who's he actually talking to during this? And now we know that it's Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
As you're going in there and you're shooting this candid, was it obviously based on looking at this picture, right? There's a wall of windows through the door, at least. On the other side of that doorway, there's a wall of windows. Does that continue in the room that you're in? So is this all window light?
Yeah. So to the right and to Dick's left is a large window, which has some large curtains, and I think they were probably open because of the quality of light on Dick. But those really 10 feet, 12 feet windows go along the entire outer wall of the office. So I'm getting all this wonderful window light coming in. And because of the color of the walls, that if I remember them right, they were off white. It was getting a lot of reflected light within the room. So it was pretty much an even overall quality of light.
What's interesting is, I can believe the curtains were pulled. It's not a super soft light. It's not actually a harsh light. It's especially, I didn't mention this when I described the picture, but this is black and white. And this light works so amazing in black and white, especially where the couch is more white, the desk is gray, there's a dark jacket and a medium gray jacket. The frame around the baby poster is dark, but is white. There's so many contrast elements in this picture. I'm curious, as you were standing there, what made you choose to shoot portrait as opposed to landscape orientation? Was it that you wanted to get the baby sign in?
Well, part of it was that I didn't want to include too much of the couch because you mentioned it's white.
Really? So okay, so that was a conscious thing.
Yeah, so I knew I didn't want to have a lot of that in the frame. So that was my initial impulse to go vertical. And then once I went vertical, I just saw the different elements in the frame. So I was carefully sort of refining my composition as he was engaged with Jesse. So it was kind of this small kind of adjustments that I was doing, and then just being aware of his expression and his gesture the entire time. So I was just making these micro adjustments, and
the result
just keeping
is just
an eye.
Amazing.
Well, thanks.
You made the comment about the couch that because it's white, you didn't want a large white object in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you did leave a part of the couch. So that was your intent to try and get the couch totally out, or you did want a little bit of it in there?
I wanted a little bit of the couch because the whole idea of all the images that I made during that year was basically to tell the story of what it was like to work at Maximum Fun for a year. So all the images that I produced there weren't meant to be just portraits of the subjects. Though I did make some portraits, straight up portraits. Most of it was basically an opportunity for me to practice documentary photography. So I was applying all my street aesthetic, my approach on the street, but doing it within a confined space that had ready access to, 5 days a week.
Did you? I've got to ask. It's Dick Van Dyke, right? I mean, I would have been fanboying. Did you have a chance to talk to him for a little bit?
I talked to him for just a little bit, introduced myself, shook his hand. But yeah, I most of the time didn't want to sort of intrude on what was happening between him and Jesse. Sometimes, I would, if there was someone there, like Kamal Bell came to the studio, and he came a little early, so I had a chance to talk with him a bit, and I made a portrait of him while we were waiting for Jesse. But for the most part, once people came in, the producer usually made a beeline for them and started getting them ready. So I just really had to sort of gauge what the vibe was after the interview, because that was the time for me to be able to sort of go in. And I never asked permission to shoot.
Really?
No, I mean, they knew I was a photographer, and then I just started making photographs, and no one ever said anything. And so I just kept shooting it. And I think the fact that I was always very discreet, I think helped a whole lot.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So what is so you shoot something like this, or you shoot on the street or whatever. What is your basic workflow once you have your images in the camera? Or even let's go to when you are shooting. I'm curious how much you pre-visualize your shot. So this one you were aware of the room as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also, once you do get your shots and you come back to the computer, what is your workflow for importing and culling and editing your pictures?
I'll go through Lightroom. I usually use Lightroom. I'm playing with Capture One, but primarily I use Lightroom. I'll import them into my computer, and I usually would just look through them really quickly, and just look for one that I'm going to post on Instagram the next day, and then usually I just leave them alone. I'll probably return to them, you know, maybe the following week or a couple of weeks afterwards, and really do a serious culling of the images, just so I can have some separation between how I may have felt that day when I was making
Right.
the photographs and having a more, you know, uh, a less invested um, attitude towards the pictures. And then I kind of just flag the images and sort of try to um, cull them down to a reasonable amount. Usually I'm only looking for one, two, three images at the most. I kind of know what I'm looking for with my photographs. The great majority of them are I consider just practice, um, because for me, I'm really looking for photographs that I've not made before. I'm looking for images that have that evidence of them, because there are pictures I know that are nice and good, but they're images that I've done, 100,000 times before. I'm not
Right.
really interested in seeing those images. I'm really hunting for the images that show me, oh, okay, I'm taking a risk here. Oh, this failed, but it was an interesting mistake. Let me examine this. And so I just kind of put those together and just have them as reference as I go out and shoot the next time.
I like that attitude actually, was that, this image didn't turn out like I wanted. So not throw it away. Let's examine it because something interesting is happening, whether I like the end result or not. There's something finding the sweet spot in something that you may not overall like. An image like this, what would you have done in post?
Oh, I think usually in Lightroom, I will make an adjustment using the in color file, and I'll do my usual, you know, levels adjustments, curves, color adjustments, all that. And then I'll convert it, make a virtual copy, and go into a black and white mode. And I'll basically use the black and white controls in Lightroom in order to get the look that I want from the black and white. All of that whole body of work I knew was going to be black and white from the very beginning.
Okay.
So
let me go deeper on that, because looking through your website, which is popping up, by the way, on the screen all the time here, thecandidframe.com. Looking through your website, you have street portraits, street photography in both color and black and white. You're not like some street photographers that are, it's black and white or die type thing, right? Mm-hmm. So why on a shot like this, when clearly there are times you choose color, why did you know that these would be black and white and that this one would be black and white? Or how did you know?
Man, I don't have a good answer for you on that one. I just felt like this needs to be black and white. I just kind of knew it from the very beginning, just because of the spirit of the kind of, I think it was more reflective of the story that I think I wanted the relationships, the spirit of what it was like to work there to be at the fore. And I felt that doing it in black and white was the best way to do that. I can see the color images, and maybe they might have worked just as well in color, but to my thinking, then I just felt like black and white was just the right choice.
You know what's interesting? Okay, I'm going to take this specific image as my case model here. In color, I actually don't know how well this would have worked in comparison to the black and white. And here's why to me. I don't know. Like I mentioned before, there's 6 hangers on the coat rack. 2 of them have coats, 4 of them are empty. And they're even. It's almost like you couldn't have set it up better, right? They're evenly spaced. So you have jacket, 2 hangers, jacket, 2 hangers. It's symmetrical in that sense. But one of them is a mid-gray and one of them is a dark dark blackish gray. In color, I don't know what they could have been, because some colors are not dark colors, but they convert to a dark color in a black and white. I may not have noticed the contrast of those jackets as much if they were just two colors. So really, this shot in black and white, it's what we always say, right? Black and white strips out the real life and leaves you with shapes. And here, I'm left really noticing the black pen against the gray desk. For all I know, that desk was yellow. I don't know.
Yeah, it was a gray desk. It was an old gray metal desk. But your point about the lines and shapes was at the forefront of my mind when I was making the composition, because the line and shape of the desk, the doorway, the rack, the couch. I was looking at the couch and all of those things, not as a couch, not as a doorway, not as hangers, but of lines and shapes and how I wanted each to complement each other. So that's why I was so careful in terms of the refining of the frame, because I wanted to have a sense of balance in terms of the setting.
Yeah, and it does. It balances quite well. You've got, because there's words on that picture, on that poster, baby, that does draw your attention, right? It's not a secondary thing. You want to read text in a picture. That balances Dick from the high to low area. Then, if you had that doorway open, which, by the way, brilliant that you left the doorknob in there. Okay. A lot of people would have cropped that out. The fact that it's not just a doorway, but I can see the door lets me feel like I can walk through it. And you've got all those windows back there. That would brightness wise would have made the picture heavy on the camera right side by putting the white couch in there enough to know that it's a couch, because you can actually see the foot of the couch too. That balances that doorway. There's a lot in this image compositionally that just really, really works. I have two questions. One, if you were to be able to shoot this one again, is there anything you'd do differently?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably not. I think I really like this shot. If anything, I might have just pushed a little harder to get a straight up portrait of Dick, of just his face, because he's just got a great face.
Again, that smile. How many times have you and I seen that smile in our lives?
Man.
And it is an infectious attitude that he exudes from his face.
He does, like, I think 100 sit-ups every morning. He was talking about his exercise routine, and he's just inexhaustible. He's just amazing.
I love it. How could somebody that doesn't do this, that wants to do this more, do you have anything that somebody could do or learn or practice to set themselves up to grab a more fun type of shot or image like this?
For me, it's my approach to portraiture oftentimes is hanging out with a camera. That for me is the ideal portrait setting, not putting somebody in front of a white seamless in a studio with a strobe. For me, I'm at a complete loss as to what to do on that situation, because there's nothing to play off of.
Right.
So when I do like a portrait session, I'm just like, let's go out and hang out somewhere, and I just grab my camera and then we just go wherever. Not necessarily a park, but some place where there can be some activity, like a restaurant or a bar or something, where we can have interactions with stuff. And then, I'm often looking at where the light is. So I'll try to choose a location or a spot within whatever venue we've gone to where the light is good. And then we'll just start talking, and I'll shoot on occasion. And so I think the anyone you have access to in that way, photograph them. Get them used to you having your camera around all the time, because there are going to be some people that are going to be like, what are you doing? But once they get used to the fact that you're always photographing, most people eventually just disregard you. So
right.
Next time you go
almost
out,
forget that you're there.
Yeah. I mean, go out with 3 or 4 of your friends on some excursion, go to the museum. It doesn't really matter what it is, but them interacting with each other as well as you provides you a perfect opportunity to just be there and just constantly observing them, their interactions, their reactions, the gestures, the way the light is changing as you're sitting there. you get to be really observe people being very relaxed in themselves in a way that's very difficult to elicit when you just have them standing fully exposed in front of a backdrop or a wall.
So you are, through your podcast for 13 years, that still really amazes me. 13 years of The Candid Frame. And by the way, folks, if you have not listened to The Candid Frame, something that you definitely should do. But you're a study of photographers, but you're also a studier of people and shapes and photographs and the art as a whole, right? So I'm kind of curious, who's the photographer you would say that if people are not familiar with, they should go look up?
Oh man, that is so hard because there's so many photographers who have made an impression on me. There's a photographer who I have loved forever, and I've had the good fortune of interviewing him twice, and that's William Albert Allard.
Okay.
Famous National Geographic photographer, and he has had published several books over the span of his career. But there's a one book that if you can find it, grab it. It's called. Oh my God, I'm drawing a blank. I'll have to take a look. But basically, it's about his approach to documentary photography, his approach to telling stories. And I just went through that book over and over and over again. And I just loved his sensibility, his eye, but also how he would, build relationships with people for the purposes of photographing them. And he was an amazing technician because he used primarily Kodachrome 64 and 200. And he would do things with that film that everyone else would tell you that is impossible.
Really?
Because he would photograph under conditions where the light is barely indiscernible. The kind of light, indoor light, for example, we're just getting some light in from just a doorway or from, the neon light of some juke joint in Mississippi. And he would make these photographs and he would be shooting at a 15th of a second, something like that with his lens wide open. And you look at these photographs and you just go, how is that even possible?
Okay. So we gotta look him up.
Just stunning. Yeah. Yeah, and I've interviewed him twice. I interviewed him, I think, about 2 years ago was the last time, or maybe a year ago. He's a gem. But
so, just in case, now that people have heard the description of how he shoots, say the name one more time.
William Albert Allard. Allard is spelled Allard.
Okay, so go look him up too, and I'm ready to start typing it now myself. If people want to find out more about Ibarionex Perello, you've got, obviously you're on all social medias and it's Ibarionex on all the social media platforms. So
yeah, that's right.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. By the way, speaking of Twitter, you are one of the most prolific people sharing links and information on Twitter. If you're not following him on Twitter, you really should. Again, it's at Ibarionex. Your website with all your tutorials and your podcast and everything is thecandidframe.com.
Right.
What episode number are you on? You're about to do 500, I think you said?
Well, at the beginning of 2020, I think I'm at 484 now. So we're like 16 episodes away from 500.
Awesome. Just congratulations on the success and on making that
thanks.
list that Flern mentioned. That is just awesome. And thank you so much for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man. Anytime.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And real quick, before we go, I do want to let everybody know the Flern discount. I just mentioned The Candid Frame was on that Flern magazine list of the best podcasts for photographers. Go find that list. The link to that is in the Aaron Nace episode, which was one episode before this one with Ibarionex.
And if I can mention one thing, the last book that you mentioned, Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. If people go to the Rocky Nook website, rockynook.com, and purchase the book from there and use the promo code Perello 40, Perello, numeral 40, they can get I think it's a 40% discount on the hardcover or the ebook or both.
Okay, so let's do that one more time. So Rocky Nook is a well-known publisher of photography books. I know Scott Kelby, I think, uses Rocky
That's
Nook.
right.
Alan Hess, I think, uses Rocky Nook. So rockynook.com and find Ibarionex's book. Give me the title of the book again.
Making Photographs.
Okay. And this is the visual workflow book.
Right.
And the code, no spaces, all one word, Perello, which is his last name, 40, Perello 40, will Perello.
With a
that will
numeral
get
40,
you a discount on the book. That's awesome. That's a good one. Good one. And along with that, what I was saying about Flern, if you want a subscription to Flern, I've got a code for you, a discount code, behind the shot 20, no spaces, behind the shot 20 if you sign up for a Flern subscription. And Flern is like an online education site, but Aaron Nace is just, in my opinion, one of the best people at teaching. I mean, he's so real and so approachable and gives you all the download files. I'm sounding like I'm a commercial. I will state up front, I am not sponsored by Flern. I just am really appreciative that he gave the viewers and listeners of the show a discount code. That's awesome. Flickr group, Behind the Shot on Flickr. Make sure you do that. And also the podcast itself. All the links to subscribe are at behindtheshot.tv. So you can go there and find every link. But let me just tell you up front, if you use a podcast app to subscribe, you can subscribe to the video version. You can subscribe to the audio version, either one of those in your podcast app, depending on whether or not it supports video. And then also the video is on YouTube at Behind the Shot. So you can subscribe on YouTube as well, and make sure you hit that bell, man. Just bang that bell so that you get a notice on everything. Ibarionex, dude, I appreciate it. Tell me one more thing on your podcast really quick. Any guests that you know you've got coming up or recent ones you've had you want to mention?
Oh, man. There have been.
I know, because you're every week. You've got a ton of them.
So many people. Yeah. I mean, as soon as you ask me, I draw a complete blank. Just tell people to go check it out. I mean, they can do us. If you go to, I have an app for the Candid Frame, both on Android and on Apple iOS. So it's searchable. So you can search by name or you can search by genre. So if you have a particular affinity for a particular type of photography, just put in a keyword and you'll likely find a photographer that
and you've had, I mean, let's be honest, 13 years, yes, but it's not just that. Your podcast is so well known and so well respected now that you've pretty much had almost anybody that could be anybody on the show at one point or another.
Oh, I wish I could say that. There's so many people I've yet to get on the show, but
okay, you open the door. Who's the bucket list guest that you have not had?
Oh man, that's a lot of buckets.
Oh, really?
That's a lot of buckets. It's like Mark Seliger, Bruce Davidson, Annie Leibovitz, Kudelka. Oh man, I mean Sebastião Salgado. It goes on and on. Platon. It's just there's so many people I would just love to sit down with. I'm hoping to get Rebecca Webb and Alex Webb. They just released an ebook on Brooklyn. So I'm reaching out to them this week and seeing if I can get them on the show since they're promoting a book.
And that's one of the fun things, by the way, about podcasting is there is the guest that I get through a connection or just a cold email to somebody saying, hey, we'd be on the show. And this is kind of inside the Beltway type talk. So to the listeners, I apologize. But there's always that moment when sometimes you get a guest, like I just started working to get, do you know Dennis Reggie?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dennis Reggie is the wedding photographer to the Kennedys. He has been named by more than one magazine as the best wedding photographer on the planet. So I just got him and we're working on getting it. We've already got the image picked. Excited as heck about that one. So if you're a wedding photographer, you'll look forward to that one. So again, Ibarionex Perello, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
So my name is Steve Brazill. This is the Behind the Shot podcast. And just a reminder to you, behindtheshot.tv is the website. You can find all of my information at behindtheshot.tv for the podcast, but also stevebrazill.com for me. I'm on most social media as Steve Brazill. Twitter and Instagram are my favorites. Facebook is Steve Brazill Photography. You can go there if you want. I'm there now and then. That's pretty much about it. So to everybody, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. This is the show where we try and get inside the mind of great photographers by taking a closer look behind one of their shots. We'll see you on the next show.